Supercross of the 2022 season at Anaheim 1, and we thought we'd kick off this year's in-depth look at the factory bikes with Jett Lawrence's 2022 Honda CRF 250R. This is his HRC Honda factory machine. It is the second year since Honda has brought the 250 program in-house, and arguably this is the first bike that is more of the HRC bike. Since the first year the program was brought in so late over from Geico, it was basically the same staff, the same equipment. They just kind of overhauled it in and had developed the bike over the years, slowly updating the parts. However, with the 2022 being all new, it was a great opportunity for them to implement a lot more of the components and suppliers that normally work with HRC, while at the same time the Honda team has given this prior staff from Geico a little bit of leeway to do things to this bike or work with certain suppliers that you do not see on the 450. I think that's actually where we'll start with. At the suspension end, yes, this is Showa kit suspension. It looks the same as what you're seeing on Ken Rock's and Chase Exon's bike, but it does have a little bit different input. You have in-house guys at HRC, they're in the suspension department. You have their Showa technicians that help them, but you also have a little bit of assistance from Factory Connection in this regard. Both the Lawrence brothers, of course, have time working with Ziggy from FC, and he has a little bit of a say and input in helping them develop the settings and the equipment that you see here on this bike. Something that's really unique and noteworthy about this suspension is the shock is a kit body. It's a two-piece billet. Lower shock body, the top part is a forged unit. It's a little bit bigger shaft size at 18 millimeters. It's got the fancy coatings. The shock adjuster size is actually the same as the current production Showa shock on the Honda 250, as they updated that this year. So now a production Honda 250 shock has the same adjuster size as the A-kit. So it's maybe not as trick as it once was, but there are still some cool goodies here. But up at the forks, the bike has stock fork lugs on it. This is both on the HRC 450 and the HRC 250s. The forged units that were on the bike last year were maybe a little bit too rigid for what the riders are looking for, so they've gone back to this cast lug unit, has a little bit more flex. We've noticed between the bikes, they've also played around with some of the hardware. Some of the bikes are running stock steel axles and swing arm pivots on the Honda team, depending on the rider's preference, and they're definitely looking for feel now. The forks itself are still a kit fork cartridge and tubes, albeit the internals on this are not all that different from the current Honda 250 production bike. You have items such as the piston, the valve stack, the spring perches are different in this type of setup, but the actual cartridge and damping rod are not all that different. There are some things that Showa sprinkled in here, but once again, the days of work suspension are sort of slowly fading away. What these guys are racing on is not all that different than what me or you can buy off the showroom floor. Going over to the engines and the electronics on this bike, this is where they've really had to put their thought into this off-season. It is a fairly all-new engine. So for the team, items such as their crank, their conrod, their piston, a lot of those items have been able to carry over, but where they've really had to put a lot of work and effort into is the very top end of the engine. This bike has a completely different rocker arm ratio than the outgoing bike, and the cam profile is wildly different with that. So the team has really been working hard on taking this new low to mid engine and getting it broad enough for what Jett and Hunter Lawrence are looking for. Honda, of course, is fairly secretive by nature of what actual components or what brands are being used in their engine. So a little bit of this is speculation based off comments we've heard, but from what we know, the camshaft in the bike is through a supplier of Honda Japan that HRC has linked the US side up with. We believe that the valve train is probably coming through Exeldyne based on the connections of the people that are in the engine department. And then also interestingly enough is the 450 side of the team, and last year also the 250 side was sponsored by Wiseco. The pistons, however, in the 250, from what we know, are not actually supplied by them, and the 250 no longer carries the Wiseco branding. Moving down in the bottom end, of course, the bike has a different conrod and crankshaft that they've modified. And then an interesting note is the past few years, there's been a lot of work with HRC components on the transmission and the primary gear ratio, that some parts have gone from Japan, some parts that Geico had made before themselves, to change the gear ratios in the bike and change where the power was in each gear. That has been a huge change on this 22 production bike, and according to what we've heard from the team, that it's been a big positive, and from what we're aware, we believe they are on the production transmission ratios at the moment. They do have some primary ratio options, but we believe they are on the standard one there as well, as all those items have really improved the bike's rideability from second to third gear and even into fourth, but mostly that second to third gear transfer and range of power being the best improvement overall on this bike. Electronics, the team makes their wiring house completely in-house. The biggest focus on this is adding in the data collection needs they have, and then also updating all the connectors on board, just because these guys take the bikes apart all the time. It's not the same as me or your bike off the showroom floor where we may take the harness out of it once or twice ever in its life, even if it ever comes out at all. These guys are taking it out every weekend to inspect and rebuild the bike. So they have a much greater need for connectors that are more stout, that seal better, and just overall will put up with the demand of taking it apart 30, 40, 50 times per season during its lifespan. The exhaust system is made by Yoshimura, but to their specifications. Typically, like when they were developing the system for this bike, when they found something they're happy with, that got transferred into production. But since then, as the engine has changed and the feedback of the riders has developed, Yosh has gone in and made these guys a custom system. You'll see things such as the resonance chamber, which changes the bottom end character and helps with sound. You'll also see him change things such as the can length, shorter to longer for both Supercross and outdoors, depending on the power character they're looking for, and the core diameter, once again, just all rider feedback. This system looks like the production system, but it is completely handmade by one individual in Yosh, pretty much to tailor it to HRC's needs. Triple clamp, axle lugs, odd stuff. As far as we're aware for Supercross, this bike is standard 22mm offset on the clamps. There is no race change, so there is no rake change that we're aware of on the bike. And with the standard axle lugs, we can say that that offset is stock as well. Come outdoors, they typically go to a different offset or rake with the bike by changing the races. But for now, all that is standard in Supercross, but you will notice on Jett's bike, there is a steering dampener that's been added back to the bike. It is the old Honda Show and steering dampener that was on the bikes forever for production. That mount no longer exists on this frame. They had to mount up both to the triple clamp and to the frame, and just by tweaking on the handlebars for a second when we got to move Jett's bike, it is tight. Another really trick component on this bike is the hydraulic clutch. Of course, the 450 comes stock with hydraulic, 250 doesn't, it's cable. They've added hydraulic. One of the main reasons being is on a race motor such as this level, they're running a lot of pack pressure in that clutch. It feels stiff. Then moving to the hydro gives them improved usage over it. And part of that clutch is they are running a 9-plate system from Hinson. Stock went from 7 to 8-plate in 2022, but this race bike now has a 9-plate system by Hinson. It is much closer to the off-the-shelf Hinson than we've seen in the past, where before that they were running a modified version of a slipper clutch. They have reverted to something that is a lot more like what me or you would walk in and buy as of now with a standard post-style clutch. Some of the typical HRC items we see on this bike: titanium billet pegs with matching foot peg brackets, pin. These items have been rumored to be anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000 a pair from Honda. They are available to the HRC team, and sometimes they have allowed them out to support teams such as Geico, but trust me, they pay the bill on these things. They are nice, but they're expensive. There's also a billet Nissan caliper on this bike, but it is mated to a standard size 260mm rotor. It's actually the same designed rotor that comes stock on the bike right off the showroom floor. Another interesting item in the electronics world is something that differs between this bike and the 450s of Chase and Ken Roczen. The CRF 250R of Jett and Hunter Lawrence are still using Vortex ignitions left over sort of from the Geico days. The engine staff in-house, such as Ryan Cox, this is something they're very well versed in. This is a technology and a format that they have a lot of experience in. They're very comfortable with using. So instead of transferring the bike over to a works ignition from Keehan, they've gone ahead and stuck with what they know and what they're experienced with. Something that really stood out to us is on the left side of the frame, down right above the foot peg area, is 2 mount areas that have been welded and added to the frame. Strangely enough, it almost kind of looks like where you would add a kickstand to an off-road bike or so, but there's just these big beefy tabs there. Talking to some of the guys on the team, they've been trying to mimic what is on the right side of the frame with the rear master cylinder to give Jett and Hunter an extra area on the bike to kind of grip onto. The day we shot this bike at the intro, there was nothing mounted to it, but based on some comments we heard, we would speculate they've actually been mounting something to this area to give them additional grip on the motorcycle. Other than that, the bike also has Works HRC hubs, one of the few items on this bike you'll find. And it's hard to find aftermarket hubs. They're really lighter in stock. Honda manages to pull it off with these. They've been a stablemate on HRC machines for many, many years now, tied together with DID STX rims and a DID chain as well. Kind of a cool fun fact, the skid plate on this bike is made by CMT USA, not to be confused with CMT of Italy that is commonly making skid plates and fuel tanks that are made of carbon fiber. This is made right here in the USA. The guy who makes them is actually a member of the Vinyl MX Forum, and his primary job is making housings out of carbon fiber for underwater camera usage. This has been our inside look at Jett Lawrence's HRC Honda CRF 250R.